NASA's next moon mission needs 3 separate rockets. All 3 have to work perfectly, at the same time, in orbit. That's the basic version. But the deeper I looked into this, the more I realized how little most coverage actually explains what's happening here. Let me start with what I understood before I dug in. Most people think Artemis 3 means astronauts land on the moon. That's what it sounded like for years. That's what got reported. That's what I thought too. But that's not what Artemis 3 is anymore. NASA changed the plan. And the new plan is, honestly, more complicated than the old one. Here's what Artemis 3 actually is now. It's a test mission. In Earth orbit, no moon landing. 4 astronauts go up. A lander comes up separately. They meet in orbit. They test the docking. They test the systems. They prove everything works together. Then, everyone comes home. The actual moon landing has been pushed to Artemis 4, which NASA is targeting for early 2028. That's the update. That's confirmed. NASA restructured the program after Artemis 2 flew in April 2026. Artemis 2 did a lunar flyby with a crew. 4 astronauts went around the moon and came back. That mission worked. It was a real milestone. After that, NASA looked at what comes next and decided Artemis 3 needed to be a prove-it-first mission rather than a go-for-the-surface mission. So now, I want to explain what 3 rockets actually means, because this is where it gets genuinely hard to believe. To make Artemis 3 happen, NASA needs 3 separate rockets from 3 different organizations to launch, reach orbit, and meet each other. The first is NASA's own SLS, the Space Launch System. That's the big orange rocket NASA built. It carries the Orion capsule. Orion is the spacecraft the astronauts actually sit in. That launch takes 4 crew members up, so you have 4 humans in a capsule in orbit. The second rocket is SpaceX's Starship, not the whole system, specifically the HLS version. HLS stands for Human Landing System. This is the part of Starship designed to actually land on the moon, eventually. For Artemis 3, it goes up empty of astronauts. It launches separately. It gets to orbit. Then it waits. The third rocket is Blue Origin's New Glenn. Blue Origin is Jeff Bezos' space company. New Glenn launched for the first time in early 2025. For Artemis 3, it carries something called Blue Moon, Blue Origin's own lunar lander design. So now you have Orion with 4 astronauts in orbit, Starship HLS in orbit, and Blue Moon in orbit. 3 vehicles from 3 different rockets, 3 different companies, all floating around Earth together. What I find hard to grasp at first is the coordination required here. This isn't like docking 2 things that were built together. These vehicles were built by completely different teams, different engineering cultures, different software systems. They have to physically connect. And they have to do it in orbit, where small timing errors compound fast. The way I understand orbital rendezvous, and this is the technical part I had to sit with, is that 2 objects in orbit don't just fly toward each other like cars on a road. Orbit doesn't work like that. If you speed up, you actually rise to a higher orbit and end up going slower relative to your target. If you slow down, you drop lower and eventually overtake what you were chasing. It's deeply counterintuitive. And doing that with 2 vehicles is hard enough. 3 is something no mission in human spaceflight history has ever attempted at this scale. I want to be clear about that. This is confirmed from NASA documentation and the Wikipedia Artemis program article updated through June 2026. This multi-vehicle orbital rendezvous, 3 separate spacecraft meeting in orbit, has not been done before at the crewed level. Full stop. Now here's the layer that I think gets missed in almost every article I read. The reason there are 2 landers, Starship HLS and Blue Moon, isn't because NASA wants redundancy for Artemis 3. Both are flying on Artemis 3 to be tested, and which one lands astronauts on the actual moon surface during Artemis 4 depends entirely on how well each one performs during Artemis 3. NASA is openly saying this. The Artemis 3 mission is, in part, a competition, a live evaluation in orbit. Starship and Blue Moon both get tested. NASA watches. Then NASA picks a winner for the real landing. To me, that's extraordinary. 2 commercial landers, 1 real mission, 1 shot at proving they're ready. And the crew is there watching it happen in real time. Now let me add one more layer that changes the context for all of this. The Lunar Gateway was cancelled. In March 2026, NASA officially dropped the Lunar Gateway space station from the Artemis program. The Gateway was supposed to be a small space station orbiting the Moon, a waypoint. Astronauts would travel to the Gateway, then take a lander down to the surface. That was the original design logic. A lot of mission architecture was built around it. When Gateway got cancelled, NASA had to rethink how the pieces connect. The answer they landed on is what we now see with Artemis 3. Do the orbital meeting not at the Moon, but in Earth orbit, without a waypoint station. Just 3 vehicles finding each other in space using their own navigation and propulsion. That makes an already complex job even more stripped down. There's no station to anchor to, no shared docking port that everyone was pre-built to connect with. It's free-floating rendezvous, 3 times over. What I found when I looked at the history of orbital docking is that NASA first proved it could be done during the Gemini program in the 1960s. Gemini 8 in 1966 was the first crewed docking in history. It nearly ended in disaster. The spacecraft started spinning uncontrollably right after docking. They survived, but it showed how dangerous orbital connection can be. Then, Apollo refined it. The International Space Station expanded it to a routine that's happened hundreds of times. But routine in space means practiced, not easy. And what Artemis 3 is attempting goes well past anything that's been made routine. I want to put the scale of SLS in context too, because I think it matters for understanding why this mission can't just be reflown cheaply if something goes wrong. SLS Block 1. The version used for Artemis 1 and Artemis 2 cost approximately $4.1 billion per launch when you account for development and operational costs together. That number is confirmed from NASA Inspector General reports. Orion itself is another enormous investment. These are not things you fly twice just to verify. When SLS and Orion go up, that's it. They have to work. Which means when Orion meets Starship HLS and Blue Moon in orbit, there is no "let's try again." The astronauts are there. The hardware is there. The timeline is there. It works or it doesn't. SpaceX's Starship is in a different cost position. Elon Musk has talked publicly about targeting costs far below SLS. Starship is designed for reusability, but Starship HLS, the version designed for moon landing, has a very different profile from the Starship that's been doing test flights. It's taller, it has different propellant loading requirements. It needs to refuel in orbit before it can go to the moon, which is a whole separate technical challenge that's been discussed as a requirement for lunar missions. For Artemis 3, the refueling question is less critical since it's staying in Earth orbit, but the docking systems still need to perform. Blue Origin's New Glenn flew its first launch in January 2025. That's confirmed. It's a new rocket. It worked. But it's newer than SLS and newer than Starship in terms of operational history. Blue Moon as a lander system has never been tested in space. Artemis 3 is the first live test. So one of the three vehicles doing this historic orbital rendezvous is flying its lander for the first time ever. The way I understand the stakes for Blue Origin is this. Artemis 3 is essentially their audition. If Blue Moon performs well, they could win the contract to land humans on the moon on Artemis 4. That would be historic. That would be their version of SpaceX's Apollo moment. If it doesn't perform, SpaceX almost certainly wins that contract by default. So, Blue Origin isn't just a contractor here. They're competing for their place in history.